JonBenét Ramsey, born into a modest family, was a self-made entrepreneur. By the mid-90s, he led Access Graphics, a computer services company, turning it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise with his leadership and business expertise. Patricia Ann "Patsy" Ramsey was a lively woman who had once worn the crown of Miss West Virginia. The thriving couple started their family in 1987 with the birth of their son, Burke, and 3 years later, in 1990, JonBenét was born. At just 6 years old, JonBenét Ramsey was already an accomplished child beauty queen. Nestled in the heart of Boulder, Colorado, the Ramsey family home was nothing short of majestic. A sprawling 7,092 square foot Tudor-style mansion with 15 rooms. On the evening of December 25, 1996, the Ramseys attended a Christmas party at Fleet and Priscilla White's house. It was a cheerful event, and the Ramseys seemed in good spirits. The children were put to bed upon returning home at around 10 p.m., and the parents followed shortly. The family intended to wake up early the next morning, as they had a flight to Charlevoix, Michigan, for their family vacation. On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey made a frantic 911 call at precisely 5:52 a.m. John Ramsey and their 9-year-old son, Burke, were present in the house. The cause of the alarm was their daughter, JonBenét, who had gone missing. JonBenét and Burke's bedrooms were on the second floor of the Ramsey house. The attic space on the third floor was transformed into the parents' bedroom. The Ramseys stated that they didn't hear anything and slept through the night. Interestingly, a neighbor across the street reported hearing a scream early in the morning. Experiments demonstrated that the basement's vent could have carried the sound of the scream outside, but not up to the Ramseys' third-floor bedroom. That morning, Ramseys claimed to wake up at about 5:30 a.m. to get ready for their trip. Mrs. Ramsey slipped back into her outfit from the night before and freshened up her makeup. Then, she headed downstairs using the back stairs to the second floor, and then taking the spiral staircase to the ground floor. A step near the bottom of the stairs, she found a handwritten note spread across 3 sheets of paper. Before we dive in, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Aura, the all-in-one solution for digital security. This year has seen a surge in personal data breaches, with the most shocking being National Public Data's breach, potentially impacting every American by exposing 2.9 billion records, including social security numbers. Recognizing how vulnerable we all are, I turn to Aura for peace of mind. Aura continuously scans billions of data points across the dark web and public records, alerting me if my social security number or other sensitive data is exposed. Their real-time alerts, VPN, and password manager give me confidence and security in my online activities. What convinced me was Aura's up to $5 million identity theft insurance and their data broker opt-out service, which prevents companies from selling my data. Plus, with a 60-day money-back guarantee, I was able to try it risk-free. If you want to protect your information like I did, you can try Aura free for 2 weeks at aura.com/Voldar. Don't wait until it's too late. Secure your data with Aura today. Upon reading the first few lines indicating that JonBenét had been abducted with a demand for $118,000, Mrs. Ramsey screamed and hurried to JonBenét's room, only to find it empty. Mr. Ramsey, after hearing the scream, rushed downstairs and joined Mrs. Ramsey in the stairwell. They then checked their son's room, who appeared to be asleep. Mr. Ramsey proceeded to the downstairs area to read the ransom note. Simultaneously, Mrs. Ramsey called the police to report her daughter's kidnapping. Additionally, the Ramseys called several friends, including Fleet and Priscilla White. The police arrived at the Ramsey residence at approximately 5:59 a.m. The first to arrive were Officer Rick French and Sergeant Bob Whitson. Upon arrival, Officer French went straight into the home, while Sergeant Whitson stayed in the patrol car to call for backup. Officer French headed down to the basement and stopped in front of a door that had a wooden latch on it. He paused there for a bit, but then decided not to open it. He later mentioned he was searching for the kidnapper's exit route, and the latch being fastened on the inside meant this wasn't it. JonBenét's body was later found behind that door. Just a few minutes after the police arrived, the Whites showed up too. Mr. White, on his own, checked the basement within the first 15 minutes of getting there. He testified that the lights in the basement were already on, and the door to the hallway leading to the wine cellar room was open. He also noticed a broken window in the basement playroom. Right under that window, there was a suitcase and a piece of broken glass. He couldn't quite remember if the window was open or closed though. When Mr. White opened the wine cellar room door, he couldn't see anything as it was dark inside, and he couldn't find the switch to turn on the lights. Later that morning, around 10 a.m., Mr. Ramsey also had a look around the basement by himself. He testified to finding that same broken window slightly open and also noticed the suitcase under the window. He said the suitcase was theirs, but it wasn't usually kept there. The police sent a forensics team over to the house. At first, they thought it was a kidnapping, so they only sealed off JonBenét's bedroom to keep the evidence there intact. They didn't do this for the rest of the house, though. Detective Linda Arndt from Boulder got there around 8 a.m., expecting more directions from the kidnapper, but nobody ever tried to claim the ransom money. From the beginning, preserving the crime scene's integrity was neglected. Friends, relatives, and clergy were allowed to roam the house freely, inadvertently disrupting the scene. Their activities, which included cleaning the kitchen, preparing food, and answering phones, interfered with maintaining an environment suitable for evidence collection. In terms of gathering evidence, initial efforts were limited. Only the ransom note was secured. Some photos of JonBenét's bedroom were taken, and the pad related to the ransom note was retrieved. Burke, the Ramseys' 9-year-old son, was initially reported to be sleeping during the unfolding drama. However, he was later interviewed by authorities. His demeanor was puzzling to investigators, who struggled to gauge whether his apparent detachment was a coping mechanism or something more troubling. The family's general unwillingness to be interviewed separately, their vague and at times inconsistent accounts of the evening prior, and a lack of immediate cooperation with the police were all actions that raised eyebrows and led investigators to ponder the family's role in the unfolding tragedy. Around 1 p.m., the investigators asked John and Mr. White to take another look around the house to see if anything was amiss or missing. They started their search with their playroom and then moved to the wine cellar room. Mr. Ramsey went into the room first, turned on the light, and when he saw JonBenét's body, he cried out, "Oh my God, my baby!" JonBenét was found lying on her back, her wrists bound above her head. She had a fractured skull from being hit on the head, and her mouth was covered with black duct tape. There was also a cord tied around her neck with a wooden garrote, and she was wrapped in a light-colored blanket. Next to her body, they found a Barbie nightgown that belonged to JonBenét. The only blood found was on her body and that nightgown. Mr. Ramsey pulled off the duct tape from JonBenét's mouth and tried to untie her hands. After that, he carried her body upstairs. His actions, while perhaps instinctual, further contaminated the crime scene. After JonBenét's body was found, the basement area was finally sealed off. The police's approach shifted from a kidnapping investigation to a murder case. Commenting on this, the Boulder police chief, Mark Beckner, said, "Yes, the crime scene was not handled properly, and this later affected the investigation." Throughout the morning, police struggled to gain detailed information from the Ramsey family. Basic questions about the night before, the state of the windows and doors, and a description of JonBenét's pajamas were discussed. But the responses were often vague or incomplete, complicating the initial investigation. The initial failures in preserving the crime scene continued to haunt the investigation, leaving more questions than answers in this case. Let's examine the evidence carefully, starting with the autopsy report. Given the extensive evidence accumulated over several years, and to keep the length of the video short, I'll present certain details exclusively in written form within the video. Feel free to pause at any point to read these segments. The autopsy was performed by Dr. John Meyer at the Boulder County Coroner's Office and revealed her cause of death as asphyxiation due to strangulation, coupled with head trauma. Evidence from the autopsy indicates she was alive at the time of the strangulation and showed signs of having struggled against her assailant. According to the report, no alcohol or drugs were found in her system. JonBenét was wearing 2 layers of underwear. The inner layer was stained with urine and blood, and the outer, longer layer showed urine stains. Blood was found on the following items. DNA testing appeared to indicate that all blood evidence belonged to JonBenét. there was intermingled DNA with JonBenét's blood spots on the panties. Investigators wanted to know if SA had occurred, and based on the findings, it didn't seem to be the case, especially by conventional standards. The significant bruising, lacerations, physical trauma, and injuries typically associated with an assault by an adult male were not observed. However, some non-penetrative actions occurred. Some wood fragments from the paintbrush used to create the garrote were found in JonBenét's private area. Evidence suggests that she was assaulted while she was still alive. Over time, some have suggested that this behavior could be attributed to a child's exploratory actions. Evidence indicated the perpetrator pulled down the underwear worn by JonBenet. The assault occurred. The underwear was then pulled back up to the original position. No semen was found. JonBenét's body had been cleaned, leaving a residue that could be seen under fluorescent light. The autopsy report also noted signs of potential previous trauma to her private area, with experts differing in opinion on its importance. As this is one of the important aspects of this case, I will present arguments from both sides, and you can make up your own mind. In a case against the Ramseys, Federal Judge Julie Carnes stated that no evidence, however, suggests that she was the victim of chronic sexual abuse. The FBI concluded that JonBenét's injuries in her private area did not align with a pattern of abuse, and they found no proof of any other form of abuse. The penetration that resulted in minor injuries was probably part of a staged crime scene designed to divert law enforcement's attention. According to Dr. Robert Kirshner of the University of Chicago's Pathology Department, the genital injuries indicate penetration, but likely not by male genitalia, indicating evidence of molestation that night as well as prior instances. If she had been brought to an emergency room and doctors had observed the evidence, her father would have been arrested. In mid-September, a group of pediatric experts from across the nation arrived at one of the key findings of the investigation: that JonBenet had experienced trauma to her private area before the day she was murdered. There was unanimous agreement among them on this matter, and they strongly dismissed any suggestion that the injuries and ongoing inflammation could be attributed to problems with urination or self-exploration. Dr. Bauf, JonBenet's pediatrician, has consistently said he had no concerns about prior abuse. JonBenet had 27 pediatrician visits between March 1993 and November 1996. Only 5 of these occasioned an examination of genitalia. However, it has been noted that if Dr. Bauf had known about possible abuse and not reported it to social services, he would have been in serious trouble with the law. Hence, he had no incentive after the killing to concede that abuse was a possibility. Also, I would like to mention that the day before the murder, someone mistakenly called 911 from the Ramseys' house during the party on December 23rd. Some wonder whether it might have been a child calling about abuse of self, sibling, or friend. It's also equally important to note that neither parents had a history of child abuse or assault, and JonBenet's siblings' testimonies are consistent with that fact. During the autopsy's external examination, the forensic pathologist found no evidence of scalp trauma, a finding supported by photographs that showed no visible signs of head injury. However, the internal examination unveiled a significant area of scalp hemorrhage located in the right temporoparietal region, spanning roughly 7 inches by 3 inches. Additionally, a rectangular-shaped fragment of skull, displaced in the posterior-parietal area, was identified, measuring approximately 1.75 inches by 0.5 inches. Given the nature of the injury, investigators dismissed the possibility of an accidental fall or the deliberate slamming of JonBenet's head against an object as the cause. The evidence pointed towards the use of a weapon with a dull round edge, something elongated, which would be capable of generating the necessary acceleration and force to inflict the observed damage. The absence of blood was attributed to the lack of a scalp laceration. Several factors could explain why the scalp did not lacerate in this instance. The age of JonBenet played a role. Younger children have skulls that are less rigid and more flexible, providing less support for the skin to split under the impact of a blunt force. Additionally, their skin is more elastic compared to that of adults. The instrument used to strike had a smooth edge, similar to that of a golf club or the bezel head of a maglite, which could have minimized skin damage. A heavy, black police-style flashlight, which belonged neither to the police nor the Ramseys, was found on the kitchen counter. During forensic examination, it appeared that both the flashlight and its batteries had been deliberately cleaned of any fingerprints. According to the autopsy findings, the stomach was found to contain a minor quantity of yellow to light green tan material, resembling pieces of vegetable or fruit, possibly identifiable as fragments of pineapple. Photographs captured of the house on that day show a bowl of pineapple placed on the kitchen table with a spoon inside it. Yet, both John and Patsy Ramsey claimed they had no recollection of placing the bowl on the table nor of giving JonBenét pineapple to eat. Regarding the timing of when the pineapple was consumed, 3 main theories or arguments have been presented. One theory suggests that the pineapple could have been eaten during the dinner at the Whites' residence. However, Mr. White did not remember whether pineapple was actually served at his dinner party. As per the second theory, JonBenét ate pineapple few hours before going to the Whites' party. In favor of this theory, Boulder medical examiner stated it could have been eaten as early as 4:30 p.m. before the Ramseys left their home for a dinner at the Whites'. And as per the last theory, JonBenét ate pineapple after coming back from White's party and before her death. Proponents of this theory state that at White's party, JonBenét ate crabs and that crab meal had been digested. This would mean that the pineapple must have been eaten after the meal at the Whites, as it was still not digested. JonBenét's body was found with complex rope slipknots and a garrote affixed to her. The garrote featured a wooden handle, ingeniously crafted from the midpoint of a paintbrush. A segment of the brush's bristle end was discovered in a container holding Patsy's art materials, yet the paintbrush's lower third remained elusive, despite thorough searches of the residence. A nylon cord was fastened to this wooden piece, with one end forming a loop that included a slipknot, encircling JonBenét's neck within this loop. Fibers that matched the material of the cord used in the slipknots and garrote were located on JonBenét's bed. Hair that corresponded to the JonBenét's was intertwined in the knot positioned at the back of her head, and in the knot, securing the fragmented paintbrush handle to the garrote. A piece of cord was found loosely wrapped around JonBenét's right wrist, yet there were no signs suggesting her wrists had been securely tied at any point. This observation led several investigators to speculate that the cord might have been placed on her wrist post-mortem as part of staging. DNA extracted from 2 segments of the cord was identical to JonBenét's DNA. This particular cord did not match any cord found within the Ramsey household. Evidence gathered during the autopsy was consistent with the inference that she struggled to remove the garrote from her neck. Coroner's report noted injuries on the right side of JonBenét's face and left lower back, and characterized them as abrasions. Later in the investigation, Detective Lou Smith introduced a controversial theory that JonBenét Ramsey allegedly had been subdued with a stun gun. I mentioned the word allegedly because there is no evidence for it, and there is disagreement among experts about the origin of the marks observed on her body. Smith said red marks found on JonBenét's body were about 3.5 centimeters apart, roughly the same distance between contacts on an air taser model 34000. But a spokesman for Air Taser named Stephen Tuttle raised doubts that the company's device was used in the killing. "I am bewildered. I don't know what to think about the theory," Tuttle said. Tuttle conceded that 2 marks are close to the width of the contacts of an air taser, but said that's where the similarities end. "We have never seen those types of marks when you touch somebody with a stun gun," he said. "It is uncommon for the stun gun to leave only 2 marks on the skin. The body moves away from the stun gun, causing multiple erratic marks. How you can keep this thing perfectly still not once but twice on a squirming child? It doesn't make any sense," he said. He also said the air taser does not render people unconscious. Nebraska doctor Robert Stratbucker, who has conducted several experiments on stun guns and is considered a courtroom expert, said he takes considerable issue with Smith's stun gun theory. In support of Detective Lou Smith's stun gun theory, John and Patsy Ramsey presented photos of JonBenét from Christmas morning showing no marks on her neck. While these photos neither conclusively prove nor disprove the stun gun theory, they do confirm the absence of visible marks at that time. Investigators found the length of the ransom note particularly unusual. Extending over 2.5 handwritten pages, it deviated significantly from typical ransom notes, which are generally brief and direct. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist, remarked that in his 60 years of practice, he had never encountered a ransom note like this one. The ransom note demanded exactly $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, a peculiarly specific sum that matched John Ramsey's recent work bonus. This suggested that the perpetrator might have had access to personal information about the Ramsey family, leading investigators to suspect employees at Access Graphics who might have known about John's bonus. Furthermore, the note included unusual phrases such as, "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction," and "Don't try to grow a brain." These phrases led to speculation that the note may have been influenced by movie dialogues, with possible inspirations being films like Ruthless People, Ransom, Escape from New York, Speed, and Dirty Harry. The FBI advised local police that it was highly uncommon for a ransom note of such length to be written at the scene of the crime. This, among others, led police to suspect that the note might have been staged. The only fingerprints found on the note were those of Patsy Ramsey and members of law enforcement who had examined it. Both the final note and a practice draft were penned using a pen and notepad sourced from within the Ramsey household. The pen was found returned to its usual place by the phone, suggesting a familiarity with the household. Additionally, another page in the same notepad contained the words Mr. and Mrs. I, which indicated an aborted first attempt at starting the ransom note. The handwriting in the note was consistent throughout, which is noteworthy since one common method to obscure one's handwriting is to vary the script deliberately. Nevertheless, there seems to have been no attempt by the writer to disguise their handwriting, indicating a degree of confidence or oversight. Who could have possibly written this note? We will take a look at that in the next chapter. But after going through this note multiple times, I have reached the conclusion that it doesn't seem to be written by someone with a real understanding of criminal behavior. It's highly unlikely that someone inexperienced in crime could write a note so revealing of their ineptitude while simultaneously moving undetected around a house for hours, committing kidnapping and murder without being heard or seen, leaving minimal physical evidence, and without any clear signs of entry or exit. It's unlikely that someone capable of such precise and controlled actions would write a note like the one found. You cannot be both unsophisticated in criminal ways and execute what could be considered the crime of the century. The Ramseys reported that their house was unsecured during the night, as they had not activated their security alarm. On the morning of December 26th, at least 7 windows and a door were found open. Several ground-level windows, including a window well with a removable grate that led to 3 basement playroom windows, were easily accessible. This particular window well was concealed at the back of the house. Initially thought to be shattered, further examination revealed that the window was cracked along the edges and missing a piece of glass, allowing enough space for someone to potentially reach in and unlock it. There was clear evidence of a disturbance in the window well area. Leaves and white styrofoam packing peanuts typically found in the well had been moved to the sides of the center window's sill. Additionally, green foliage was discovered tucked under the movable grate, suggesting that it had been recently opened and closed. Similarly, a leaf and white styrofoam packing peanuts, identical to those found in the window well, were located in the wine cellar. Additionally, Boulder police experiments demonstrated that it was possible for a person to enter the basement playroom through the center window. Intriguingly, no identifiable fingerprints were found on the broken window. Despite employing cyanoacrylate fuming methods to reveal any latent fingerprints, the forensic team found none. Directly beneath this window, a suitcase was discovered with a shard of glass from the window pane underneath it. Retired Detective Lou Smith speculated that the attacker might have intended to use the suitcase to either kidnap JonBenet or move her body out of the house, but it wasn't possible. The basement window had been previously broken by John Ramsey during a lockout incident. Outside this window, investigators discovered a spider web on the window well grate. Spider web strands connecting the window well to the grate were intact, indicating that the grate had not been lifted. A likely scenario since this particular species of spiders does not build webs in winter due to inactivity. Additionally, climbing through that window would require sitting on the sill, which would disturb the dust and dirt there. However, these were found undisturbed, further suggesting that the window was not used for entry on the night of the murder. The morning temperature was 9 degrees, with a light dusting of snow having fallen overnight. An early arriving Boulder police officer noted that his steps on the driveway and sidewalks left no visible footprints. Therefore, a person walking along these paths would not have left any footprints. In the basement, several recent unidentified shoe prints were discovered imprinted in mold growing on the floor. Notably, a shoe print bearing the high-tech brand mark on its sole was found approximately 3 feet from JonBenét's body. The print, imprinted in both dust and mold, appeared relatively fresh due to its clarity and detail, and it featured distinctive tread patterns with a zigzag design, typical of military or hiking boots. Despite thorough investigations, the print could not be matched to any footwear owned by family members or known suspects. The database of shoe prints, encompassing various brands and models, also failed to yield any matches. A 2002 Washington Post article, citing an anonymous source, reported that investigators had determined the boots that made the footprint found near JonBenét's body belonged to her brother, Burke. Ramsey's attorney Lynn Wood refuted these claims, stating, "Burke Ramsey does not and has never owned a pair of quote-unquote trademarked high-tech sneakers that the Ramseys are aware of." However, in a 2022 interview with Dr. Phil, Burke said, "Yeah, I owned a high-tech shoe with the compass on the string. I always played down in the basement. It's our house, so what if it's my shoe?" Steve Thomas, a former investigator on the case, noted that high-tech boots were also commonly worn by police officers, and some officers reportedly visited the crime scene unofficially and without documentation. Also, the direct link between the footprints and the crime remains unproven. If a print were found overlapping an object directly connected to the crime, such as part of the blanket covering JonBenét and the floor, it would suggest a stronger connection to the crime, unless, of course, it was inadvertently placed there by a police officer. Moreover, another partial shoe print featuring only a portion of a logo was also discovered near JonBenét's body. We are not sure if the smaller print may be that of a child or a carabiner or a similar object. A previously unidentified palm print on the door to the wine cellar has been identified as belonging to Melinda Ramsey, JonBenét's adult half-sister, who was in Georgia at that time. According to further investigations, 3 palm prints were found on the door leading to the basement room, a door that the perpetrator would have needed to close to secure the lock. 2 of these prints were identified as belonging to Patsy Ramsey. Asserting that the 3rd print must belong to an intruder seems like a stretch to me. None of the palm prints of the family members matched the unidentified print from that door. Notably, the prints of these 4 family members who had stayed in the house had never been collected for comparison. The coroner used the same set of clippers on all of JonBenét's nails, potentially mixing DNA from previous autopsies, which was identified in 3 of the 13 DNA tests. In early 1997, CBI conducted tests on these samples, and DNA profiles from JonBenét's fingernails showed a mixture, with the majority matching her own DNA, but also included foreign genetic markers, 2 in the right-hand sample and 4 in the left-hand sample. The DNA from the underwear also showed a mixture, primarily JonBenét's, with 1 foreign genetic marker. In 2003, Greg LaBerge from the Denver Crime Lab extracted material from a mixed blood sample on JonBenét's underwear and established a DNA profile known as Unknown Male 1. This DNA sample from JonBenét's panties was submitted to the FBI's Combined DNA Index system. However, the sample did not match any profile in the database, which includes over 1.6 million profiles from known offenders and arrestees. No matches have been found even after 20 years. Since then, 6 unique and unidentified genetic profiles, 5 male and 1 female, have been discovered in this case. Additionally, the left fingernail scrapings revealed unidentified male 1, while the right fingernails showed 2 more unique profiles, unidentified male 2, and a unique unknown female profile. The DNA profile from the waistband, seams, and crotch of the panties was unidentified as male 3. In 2008, under Boulder DA Mary Lacey's direction, Bode Technology conducted touch DNA testing on following previously untested key items. The previously identified male DNA profile, UM1, was identified on both sides of the long underwear's waistband. Dr. Angela Williamson said, "Touch DNA are skin cells that you shed when you come into contact with anything. The discovery that the unknown male DNA from JonBenét's underpants also matched the DNA on the long underwear's waistband was unexpected. We were like, this is pretty big. This gives more weight to the theory that this is from the perpetrator and not from manufacturing contamination. The DNA found on JonBenét's underpants, which were larger than her size and intended for a 12-year-old, came from a packet purchased by Patsy Ramsey for JonBenet and her niece. JonBenet was found wearing a Wednesday pair of underpants from a packet found in the basement, intended for Patsy's niece rather than her usual size. The smaller underpants meant for her age were missing. There is evidence suggesting JonBenet was wiped down and changed into these larger underpants after her death. The Boulder lab excluded John, Andrew, and Melinda Ramsey as sources, but could not exclude Burke or Patsy Ramsey. 2 areas of stain on the cord were cut out and analyzed for DNA. The DNA from the 2 stains matched JonBenét's DNA. John Ramsey carried his daughter up a flight of stairs after discovering her body. He may have touched the garrote. The CBI declined to conduct further DNA analysis of the garrote due to a high probability of a DNA mixture being present on the garrote as a result of all persons who handled the item from the point of manufacture to present. A Caucasian pubic or axillary hair was found on the blanket covering JonBenét's body. Even Detective Lou Smith also referred to it as the strongest piece of evidence. However, by 2005, the FBI had identified the hair found on JonBenét's blanket as axillary. Mitochondrial DNA testing indicated that the hair could have come from Patsy Ramsey or someone in her maternal lineage. Animal hair, alleged to be from a beaver, was found on the duct tape. There are several theories about the origin of the hair. Patsy's clothing, including boots and coats with beaver trim, was requested by the police, but was never handed over. Some speculate the hair might have come from paintbrushes in the basement, or JonBenet could have picked it up at the White's party from guests hugging her while wearing beaver fur coats. Others believe the hair is from a beaver fur item worn by the killer, such as a trapper hat, or that the killer lives and works in beaver habitats, or has experience with beavers, possibly as a trapper. To me personally, it seems that the beaver hair may not even be directly linked to the crime, and JonBenet could have gotten it from anywhere. A small piece of green plastic was found in JonBenet's hair. Detectives noted it resembled the Christmas garland decorating the Ramsey home. Fibers matching the red sweater Patsy wore that night were found in key places related to the crime. The paintbrush caddy containing her art supplies, the blanket used to wrap JonBenet's body, the sticky side of the duct tape placed over JonBenet's mouth, and both knots of the ligature. Patsy denied ever going near these places wearing that sweater. It is important to mention that John Ramsey removed the duct tape from JonBenet and threw it on the blanket covering her. The friend who accompanied John Ramsey to the basement picked up the duct tape from the blanket and discarded it back onto the blanket a second time. Some items were left behind that the Ramseys assert they did not own. A baseball bat was found on the north side of the house and had fibers consistent with the basement carpet where JonBenet's body was found. A rope, initially reported to be in a brown paper sack in the guest bedroom, was actually found in a backpack in John Andrew's room. John Ramsey explained, "John Andrew loved the outdoors. I know he had this backpack there for a while." Photos from People magazine in 1996 show JonBenet with a rope similar to the one found in John Andrew's backpack, suggesting Patsy might have used the same rope as a prop. Brown cotton fibers found on JonBenet's body, the paintbrush, the duct tape, and the ligature did not match anything in the Ramsey home. Lab technicians suggested the fibers could have come from cotton work gloves. Fibers matching Patsy's jacket were found all over the white blanket JonBenet's body was wrapped in, as investigators tested different quadrants. This detail is rarely mentioned, but is as important as the fibers on the tape. As stated before, fibers consistent with those of the cord used to make the slip knots and garrote were found on JonBenet's bed. This detail, often cited online, is used to support the notion that the killer used garrote in JonBenet's bedroom. However, this is illogical given that the paintbrush tote used to create the garrote was found in the basement, just feet from where the body was discovered. During autopsy, dark fibers were found on JonBenet's shirt and her pubic area. In the 2000 interviews with Patsy and John Ramsey, investigators revealed that black fibers found in JonBenet's panties and crotch area reportedly matched one of 2 black shirts provided by John. Some claims suggest this was the same shirt John wore to the Whites party, but there are conflicting reports about the fiber material. John strongly denied this evidence, and their attorney Lynn Wood asked for the report. But as far as I have investigated, no such report ever has been produced by the police, so most probably they were bluffing. BPD later stated that the black fibers came from something used to wipe JonBenét or someone who rubbed against her when she was unclothed. In May 1997, detectives bought samples of the same nylon cord used on JonBenét from the Boulder Army store and McGuckin's Hardware. They found that Patsy Ramsey had purchased an item from McGuckin's sporting goods section on December 2, 1996, for $2.29, exactly the same price as the nylon cord. The Ramseys denied ever having the black duct tape that was used on JonBenét. Both ends of the tape were torn, indicating prior use, and no similar duct tape was found in the house. The duct tape on JonBenét's mouth had bloody mucus and a perfect set of child's lip prints, which did not indicate a tongue impression or resistance, suggesting JonBenét was not alive when the tape was applied. FBI testing identified the duct tape as a relatively uncommon type and sold at McGuckin's Hardware in Boulder. Patsy's December 9th receipt included a $1.99 item from Builder's Hardware, the same price as duct tape, but the exact item she bought is unknown. Originally, detectives hoped to prove the black duct tape was the same as that found on the back of several portraits in the house. The FBI determined that both tape samples, from the mouth and the portraits, were the same brand and type, but from different production runs, with different yarn counts, and were of low quality, possibly the Shufford Mills model PC600. However, they wouldn't call it a match. By the time detectives reviewed the store's video surveillance tapes, they had been recorded over. The sales slips listed only the store section, not the specific item purchased. There was no way to prove that Patsy bought the tape or cord on December 2nd or 9th, aside from the coincidence that the prices matched items in the same store section. At about midnight, a neighbor looked out his kitchen window towards the Ramseys' house and saw a light on in the kitchen area. Despite being closer to the source, other neighbors did not report hearing the scream even though they were awake around that time. Also, the dogs in the neighborhood, known to bark at disturbances, remained silent. The witness who initially reported the scream later retracted her statement. There are two main theories regarding the case. IDI, intruder did it, and RDI, Ramseys did it. IDI, coined by Detective Lou Smith, suggests an intruder entered the Ramseys' house and murdered JonBenét, while RDI, supported by the Boulder police, believes the Ramseys committed the crime or know what happened and tried to cover it up. To keep this video concise, I'll highlight the important points only. Feel free to pause the video to read them. Let's take a deep dive into IDI theories and explore what makes an intruder plausible. The house wasn't secured that night while the Ramseys were at the Whites or while they slept. A neighbor saw a tall, thin, blonde male wearing glasses outside the Ramseys' house on Christmas night. Additionally, there were 38 registered sex offenders living within a 2-mile radius of the Ramseys' neighborhood. The Ramseys gave out several keys to subcontractors, friends, and neighbors, many of which were not returned. An intruder entered through a broken basement window, familiarized himself with the house, and wrote a ransom note. After the Ramseys returned around 10 p.m., he hid under a bed. When they fell asleep, he attacked JonBenét with a stun gun, carried her downstairs, and left the ransom note on the steps. Unable to fit her in a suitcase through the window, he assaulted her in the basement. The intruder used a nylon cord and duct tape to bind and assault JonBenét, then strangled her and struck her head with an aluminum bat. Despite severe injuries, minimal bleeding indicated she was strangled first. Smith believed the intruder was a high-risk pedophile with a god complex. Critics questioned this due to undisturbed cobwebs and foliage around the basement window, but Smith maintained his stance, arguing that any staging, like positioning her hands and placing duct tape over her mouth, happened after death. Linda Hoffman Pugh, a 57-year-old housekeeper for the Ramseys, was a possible suspect. Her husband Mervyn was their handyman. Patsy claimed Linda was struggling financially and had asked for a loan, which was declined. Linda had a key to the house and knew the family's schedule. She was supposed to work that day but backed out. She once asked the Ramseys, "Aren't you afraid she might get kidnapped?" Their DNAs and handwriting samples were not a match. 9 months after JonBenet's murder, an intruder assaulted 14-year-old Amy, who attended the same dance studio as JonBenét. A private investigator found some suspects in Amy's case had previously worked at the Ramsey home, and cigarette butts outside Amy's house matched brands found in the Ramsey's alley. The intruder may have waited at least 4 hours inside the house before entering Amy's second-floor bedroom. Amy's perpetrator addressed her by name, bragging about knowing her, indicating he had done his homework. No personal ransom note was found, and Boulder police dismissed any link to the Ramsey case. Meyer was living with nearby neighbors, the Barnhills, when JonBenét was killed. He battled mental illness, was in debt, and had a history of violence. In August 1995, 2 months before the death of JonBenét, he was sued for owing over $24,000 and subpoenaed to appear in court. Lou Smith noted a photo of a Navy Avenger aircraft in the basement with SBTC lettering on it, which seemed beyond coincidental. The killer had signed the ransom note with SBTC. Meyer was cleared by BPD after taking a polygraph test along with no DNA match and claimed he never met JonBenét. McReynolds was a retired professor who played Santa. Barbara Kostanek, the mother of JonBenét's playmate, said JonBenét mentioned Santa promised a secret visit after Christmas. Bill provided hair and handwriting samples but was never linked to the murder. No link to a stun gun was found, and his physical ability to deliver the head blow was disputed due to his age and health. His suicide scene photos showed high-tech boots, a stun gun, and a taser near his body, items potentially linked to JonBenét's murder. He had a motive due to his property dispute with the Ramseys. His DNA did not match the DNA collected at the crime scene. Detective Smith identified Chris Wolf as a lead with many unanswered questions. His girlfriend stated that on Christmas night, he left around 10 p.m. and returned at 5:30 a.m. with no explanation. The next day, Wolf became agitated while watching news reports of JonBenét's death, suggesting her father had abused her. She noticed him wearing a Santa Barbara Tennis Club sweatshirt, potentially linked to SBTC in the ransom note. He is the only suspect named by the Ramseys in their book. Wolf's DNA did not match DNA from the crime scene. He sued the Ramseys. Therefore, it seems unlikely he would have faced an aggressive defense by Linwood or other Ramsey lawyers if he had committed the murder. On the day JonBenét's body was found, Oliva called his friend Michael Vale, saying, "I just hurt a little girl." Oliva admitted to being obsessed with JonBenét and had a poem titled Ode to JonBenét when arrested in 2000. In 2019, Oliva sent letters to Vale claiming responsibility for JonBenét's murder, stating it was an accident. His DNA did not match the DNA found at the crime scene. Carr, a 41-year-old schoolteacher, was arrested in Bangkok after falsely confessing to JonBenét's murder. He lived in Conyers, Georgia, where the Ramseys had lived before moving to Colorado. He claimed to have drugged, assaulted, hanged, and accidentally killed JonBenét. He reportedly kept her original panties as a souvenir, explaining why JonBenét was found in the wrong size. Carr's DNA did not match the DNA found at the crime scene. He claimed JonBenét was drugged, but no drugs were found in her system. He claimed JonBenét had been hung by her wrists, but there were no wrist marks to support this. Window Carr claimed to use was found closed, contradicting his account. Before we start, as the case is still open, I would like to categorically state that I am not claiming that any member of the Ramsey family is responsible for the crime. My goal is to gather information and facts from already published sources to provide a comprehensive overview of the case and the progress made in the investigation over the years. Any views presented here are not my personal opinions, but rather conclusions drawn from existing evidence and resources by the experts and BPD. Let's take a look at the evidence from the perspective of BPD. According to JonBenét was passed out in the car, and he put her to bed when they got home. No Ramsey, including Burke, has ever mentioned JonBenét eating pineapple that night. The BPD found Patsy's and Burke's fingerprints on the bowl, but Patsy denied any knowledge of the pineapple, and John stated that he recognized neither the bowl nor the spoon on the table. The BPD considered the theory that Burke made the pineapple, JonBenét tried to take some, and Burke hit her in anger. A tea glass next to the pineapple bowl, with only Burke's fingerprints, pointed towards this theory, suggesting he made the snack. Both the teacup and the bowl were overfilled, and the pineapple was served with a giant spoon, indicating a child's actions. The pineapple was found in her small intestine, indicating she ate it about 2 hours before her death. This suggests she was awake and active at home after returning from the White's party. The pineapple was in a bowl of milk, implying it was prepared by someone familiar with her sensitivity to its acidity. The pineapple complicates the intruder theory because Burke admitted going downstairs when everyone was in bed. It seems implausible that an intruder would make a snack for JonBenét, avoid Burke, then murder her and write the ransom note without anyone noticing. Even Lou Smith stated that the pineapple was a big bugaboo for those who believed in the intruder theory. The term garrote was first popularized by Lou Smith, likely to imply it was a sophisticated weapon rather than a crude tool. In reality, the cord did not resemble traditional garrotes found in online references. Rather, it was a noose with a single handle. Forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht found no hemorrhaging in the neck's strap muscles, indicating no real intent to strangle JonBenét. This poorly designed strangulation tool worked only because it was used on a 6-year-old girl who was already unconscious from a severe head injury. He suggested the red marks on her lower neck resulted from manual strangulation by twisting her shirt collar, with the perpetrator's knuckles causing the abrasion. The killer could have brought his own garrote but improvised using items from the home. He knew basic strangulation and how to tie a slip knot, but the design suggested his inexperience with making a proper garrote or with strangling. 4 distinct knots were used on JonBenét, but knot expert John Van Tassel found them to be standard, not suggesting a highly skilled perpetrator. The device was likely part of a staged scene to resemble a kidnapping victim, aiming to portray the crime as the work of a professional rather than a family member. I personally believe the idea that Burke accidentally created a garrote-like device using his Boy Scout knowledge is implausible. An intruder wouldn't need to strangle JonBenét after severely injuring her, suggesting the device was likely staged. According to BPD, the Ramseys may have found JonBenét dead or unconscious and staged the scene to resemble a kidnapping gone wrong, with her being choked from behind, indicating the killer knew her and avoided looking at her face. Lou Smith proposed a widely accepted theory that JonBenét was subdued with a stun gun, possibly an air taser, based on the autopsy results. Stun gun marks are very specific, Smith said. Once you know what they look like, it's not hard to distinguish what they are. While Smith, who solved 200 cases, was likely a good cop, he lacked expertise in anatomy and stun guns. Stun guns cause extreme pain, convulsions, and screaming, making it unlikely they could have been used on JonBenét without detection. James Kohler, former lead investigator for the DA's office, rejected Smith's IDI theory in his book, Foreign Faction: Who Really Kidnapped JonBenét. Kohler noted that the pins on Burke's train tracks matched the twin abrasions on JonBenét's back. This toy was just feet from where her body was found. However, an experiment revealed that the train track points had to pierce the skin to leave such marks. JonBenét's skin within the paired marks wasn't broken, and while the experiment showed bruising appeared around the marks 24 hours later, there was no bruising on JonBenét's skin. I must add that despite years of effort, Lou Smith was never able to find a device that matched the distance between the marks on JonBenét's body. The closest device Smith identified was made by air taser, but it still did not leave the correct sized marks. Smith conceded this point on Larry King Live on May 28, 2001. On March 17, 2000, during an interview with Barbara Walters, she asked John if he would allow JonBenét's body to be exhumed to examine the possible stun gun marks in order to clear his name. He responded that they were not going to do it, stating that it was not a priority and that JonBenét should be left at rest. Handwriting analysis suggests that the author attempted to disguise their writing, possibly by using their non-dominant hand or varying strokes. In the case of Patsy Ramsey, investigators found numerous similarities, such as the straight up and down or right slant in the letters, consistent with Patsy's writing style. The comparisons revealed that Patsy's handwriting shared key characteristics with the ransom note, including the specific way she connected letters, her use of space between words and lines, and her unique letter formations, such as the TH letter combination and the formation of uppercase R strokes. The spacing of margins, the size of both uppercase and lowercase letters, and the placement of the I dot also closely matched between Patsy's samples and the ransom note. The ransom note is the only reason an intruder was ever considered. Yet it's also what makes it clear there wasn't one. Without the note, it would be a murder in the home, and with no forced entry, the crime scene would likely have been secured, and the family questioned sooner. Although the note claimed we are a group of individuals, the use of pronouns suggested otherwise. In the first paragraph, the writer used plural pronouns like we and our 5 times, implying a group effort. However, as the note continued, the writer shifted to singular pronouns using I and my. This inconsistency in pronoun usage revealed deception, strongly indicating that the crime was not committed by a group, but by an individual pretending to represent one. The term small foreign faction also points to the Ramseys. An organization outside the USA wouldn't label themselves as foreign or small in a ransom note. Instead, they'd use their real name to take credit and intimidate authorities, likely claiming to be a global organization. In this line, the writer crossed out delivery, likely realizing a kidnapper wouldn't deliver the hostage, but rather instruct the family on where to find her. So he changed it to pick up. The ransom note's phrase, and hence, also appears in the Ramsey's Christmas message. In the ransom note, the writer crossed out a word reflecting a similar writing style, where the structure before and hence is repeated afterwards. The word attaché was written with an accent over the E, likely to suggest a foreign faction, similar to how JonBenet's name was accented, something Patsy Ramsey often did. The writer misspelled 2 words in the first paragraph, but correctly spelled others, including attaché, indicating an educated person trying to appear uneducated. The Ramseys underwent handwriting analysis to see if they wrote the ransom note. John Ramsey's sample seemed to clear him, but Patsy Ramsey's was labeled inconclusive. According to linguistic expert Donald Foster, the ransom note was likely written by Patsy Ramsey. About the sample note that Patsy submitted, he observed that not only did certain letters change, but her entire writing style seemed to have been transformed after the homicide. There were new ways of indenting, spelling, and writing out long numbers that contrasted with her earlier examples, and she was the only suspect who altered her usual preferences when supplying writing samples to the police. The Boulder Police Department had 6 handwriting experts examine the ransom note and Patsy Ramsey's samples. All agreed John Ramsey could be ruled out. None identified Patsy as the author, with the consensus being she probably did not write the note. Patsy Ramsey made a 911 call at 5:52 and hung up after a minute, but the call remained connected. 911 dispatcher Kim Archuleta later noted a change in Patsy's tone and other voices in the background. Detectives worked with the audio engineers to enhance the 911 call recording. They filtered out noise and heard 3 distinct voices. John Ramsey angrily said, "We're not speaking to you." Patsy cried, "Help me, Jesus!" And Burke asked, "Well, what did you find?" Patsy's choice of phrases like, "We have a kidnapping," and "I'm the mother," struck many as oddly formal and detached, suggesting a rehearsed tone instead of the panic expected from a mother in such a situation. Patsy claimed she only read the first few lines of the note, yet she knew it was signed SBTC Victory. The Ramseys initially claimed Burke had slept through the night and the following morning's events, but the enhanced 911 call later revealed Burke was awake. With police arriving shortly after, it appears Burke was hurried back to bed, where he pretended to be asleep. When Burke's voice was later heard on the enhanced 911 call, the Ramseys had to admit he was awake. John revised his statement, telling the National Enquirer, "We thought he was asleep, but he wasn't. Burke was awake." Patsy, however, always insisted that Burke wasn't near the phone. JonBenét was alive for over 2 hours with a severe skull fracture. The BPD believed the time gap between the blow and strangulation was too long for a professional killer, as they wouldn't have remained in the house for over an hour with an unconscious child, knowing they could be caught. Severe head injuries like JonBenet's can cause seizures, which can be alarming to non-medical individuals. Asphyxiation may have been an attempt to stop the seizure. From this perspective, Whoever took her life likely didn't plan it. They hit her, saw signs of brain death, and panicked. A criminal intruder would have fled, not staged the scene, suggesting this was an inside job. According to BPD, if Burke hit JonBenét with a maglite, Patsy or John could have found her, assumed she was dead, and staged the scene to protect him. If they didn't see a major injury, why wouldn't they seek help? Even knowing Burke hit her, how could they be sure the head wound was fatal? If she was already dead, the ligature marks would have looked different, as post-mortem wounds typically don't show bruising or redness. This suggests the Ramseys knew the head wound was fatal, or something more sinister was involved, leading them to stage the scene instead of calling 911. The basement wasn't just a confusing maze of rooms, closets, and passageways. There was also clutter everywhere. Every room, behind every door, was filled with scattered stuff. The wine cellar's light switch was in a strange, complicated spot, which explains why Fleet White had trouble finding it. It's hard to imagine how the killer got JonBenét down there in the dark, navigating the mess without making noise. Even with the lights on, it would have been difficult. John Ramsey claimed he broke the basement window in the summer of 1996 after locking himself out. But his story is full of contradictions. He told Lou Smith that he broke the window because he didn't have a key, and Patsy was out of town. According to Patsy, John even asked her to return because he couldn't get inside. However, in their book, John wrote that he left his keys inside the house, which would have negated the need for Patsy to return. There are questions about whether the window was broken in the summer or later, possibly as part of a staged break-in. Patsy mentioned the window had been broken earlier, but there's no clear timeline for its repair. John said housekeeper Linda's husband was supposed to fix it, but it's unclear if this was done. It seems unlikely that the window would have remained broken for months, especially through a cold Colorado winter. The freezing temperatures in December would likely have caused significant moisture, mold, or even frozen pipes in the basement, yet none of this was reported. The 2016 CBS documentary cast further doubt, showing that no one could have entered without disturbing a spider web found intact in crime scene photos. If the window had been broken in the summer, as John claimed, leaves and debris should have blown in, but none were observed. The DNA on the wrist ligature was found to match the DNA on the garrote, leading to the theory that the DNA on the ropes could have come from someone sneezing or coughing near the exposed spools during its manufacturing. JonBenét had been at a party, playing and opening gifts all day, and did not bathe that night. As part of the crime scene staging, she was redressed in extra-large brand-new underwear. Since the underwear was likely unwashed, contamination from the factory is a possibility. Former DA Mitch Morrissey and his team tested the same type of panties after purchasing them from the store, and despite being unworn and straight out of the package, they still contained DNA. JonBenét's poor hygiene, combined with her lack of a bath, could explain how she transferred touch DNA to her underwear and leggings by scratching herself. Moreover, if JonBenét had fought her attacker, more than just trace DNA would likely be found under her nails. In short, we can safely say that even if the touch DNA matched, it wouldn't necessarily indicate foul play. As the investigation progressed, authorities noted anomalies in the Ramseys' behavior, including their reluctance to be questioned separately. Within hours of finding JonBenét's body, John Ramsey contacted a local attorney, and by the next day, he had hired separate defense counsel from one of Colorado's top criminal defense firms for both himself and Patsy, as well as for his extended family, including Patsy's mother, his ex-wife, and grown children. Investigators were surprised by how quickly he secured legal representation for everyone, raising the question, why did his extended family, including his ex-wife, need legal protection? Another suspicious detail was that John Ramsey called a pilot to fly his family to Atlanta within 35 minutes of finding his daughter's body. The Ramseys refused formal interviews with the Boulder police for 4 months, claiming they believed the police were targeting them. When asked to take a polygraph test, the Ramseys initially refused. Their crisis management expert explained, "Our experts tell us that, given the emotional state of the parents at this stage, polygraph tests would produce absolutely nothing useful." Eventually they agreed, but only under private conditions, not with the FBI as recommended. Their legal team claimed both passed, but law enforcement remained skeptical due to the controlled environment. A grand jury was convened on September 15, 1998, to consider indicting the Ramseys on charges related to JonBenet's death. In 1999, the grand jury returned a true bill, recommending charges against the Ramseys for placing their child at risk, leading to her death, and for obstructing the murder investigation, specifically accusing John Ramsey of tampering with the crime scene. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter chose not to prosecute, stating he did not believe the evidence could meet the higher standard of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt required for a criminal conviction. From the time District Attorney Mary Lacy took office in 2001, she firmly embraced the intruder theory in the Ramsey case. In an interview with ABC News, Lacy claimed her belief stemmed from seeing a butt print in the carpet at the Ramsey house. "It was a butt print, we all saw it," Lacy recalled, adding that the undisturbed indentation gave her chills, making her believe the intruder had sat outside JonBenet's room, waiting for the family to fall asleep. No evidence, photos, or measurements were taken of the supposed butt print. The house had been filled with investigators, law enforcement, and family friends in the days before Lacy's visit, not to mention the Ramsey family's Christmas Day activity. Patsy had used the laundry area outside JonBenet's room late that night, and Burke later admitted leaving his room to play. How the intruder waited outside JonBenet's door unnoticed remains unexplained. Lacy insisted that everyone with her on the tour of the house had seen the butt print, yet there is no official record of it in police files. Detective Kolar, hired by Lacy in 2005, reviewed the case files with an open mind and concluded the evidence didn't support an intruder. In early 2006, he recommended shifting the focus to the Ramsey family, recalling in his book Foreign Faction that key medical records had been withheld. However, Lacy shocked him by refusing to pursue that lead, saying she didn't want to harm her relationship with the Ramsey family. Kolar realized the investigation was compromised by Lacy's bias. Frustrated by her lack of objectivity, he resigned in protest, believing a fair investigation was unlikely under her leadership. Former investigator Gordon Coombs noted, "It was understood that if you didn't fall in line with the intruder theory, you were out." 6 months later, in August 2006, Lacy's obsession with the intruder theory led her to believe John Mark Carr's false confession to JonBenet's murder. Lacy had not thoroughly reviewed all the case files, including JonBenet's full autopsy report. Had she read it, she would have known about a widely known yellow metal bracelet JonBenét wore. When Carr mentioned it, Lacy wrongly assumed only the killer would know about it. However, the bracelet's existence had already been published in newspapers and online. Despite the debacle, Lacy told reporters, "I'm not embarrassed. I feel bad for a community that questions what we did." BPD Chief Mark Beckner echoed the frustration, saying, "My gut reaction was that Mary Lacy did not know the facts of the case. The DNA test, which she thought would prove he did it, proved her wrong." Disappointed when John Mark Carr's DNA did not match, Lacy stated, "The DNA could be an artifact. It isn't necessarily the killer's," and added, "No one is really cleared of a homicide until there's a conviction." 1 year later, in 2007, Lacy turned to new DNA testing, hoping to clear the Ramseys before leaving office. Boulder Laboratories' trace DNA testing revealed multiple donor profiles, suggesting contamination. Ignoring this, Lacy misled the public, claiming a single intruder's DNA cleared the Ramseys. On July 9, 2008, she issued a public apology to the Ramseys, stating, "To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry." She refused to release the trace DNA details or allow independent verification. Media outlets began claiming they had been exonerated, though Lacy never used the legal term. In an interview, Lacy later admitted her decisions were based on emotion, stating, "I was trying to prevent a horrible travesty of justice. The case was a train going down the track and the Ramseys were tied to that track." Lacy's so-called exoneration was built on a mixed partial DNA profile, likely contamination, and never backed by technical data or lab reports. The legal community and those familiar with the Ramsey case reacted with outrage. David Hassani wrote in the Denver Post that Patsy and John Ramsey were handed a legal pass by a staunch ally, while Paul Campos, a law professor, questioned whether Lacy was merely incompetent or if something more troubling was happening. Detective Kolar stated, If you follow the DNA evidence solely, then we should be looking for 6 perpetrators, not 1. Former investigator Gordon Coombs echoed this sentiment, calling the reliance on touch DNA a stretch, especially given the unsecured crime scene, and further noted that Lacey had lost objectivity by getting too close to the Ramseys. Forensic expert Dan Crane pointed out that the DNA could have been transferred innocently, and noted that the word match never appeared in the reports from Boulder Technology. An investigative report in 2016 further undermined Lacey's exoneration, revealing that the DNA on JonBenet's long underwear came from at least 2 additional people. Philip Danielson, a molecular biologist, stated there was no scientific justification for Lacey's assertion that the DNA couldn't have arrived innocently. Despite popular belief, the Ramseys were never officially cleared by any court. Lacey's letter, often seen as an apology, merely stated that the DNA evidence had shifted suspicion away from them. To me, it seems that Mary Lacey has as much power to exonerate someone of a crime as you or I do. DA Stan Garnett, who succeeded Lacey, emphasized that Lacey's apology had no legal binding and that future decisions on the case would be based solely on evidence. After spending countless hours researching this case, I've reached the conclusion that the killer was both a meticulous planner and an amateur in execution. On one hand, this person managed to leave no DNA, fibers, or tangible clues behind, successfully pulling off what many consider the crime of the century. Yet, on the other hand, the same individual displayed a shocking level of carelessness that's hard to reconcile with such flawless planning. The killer wandered around the house long enough to write a lengthy ransom note using the family's own notepad and pen. The contrast between the killer's precision and amateurish blunders is what makes the JonBenét mystery so haunting and inexplicable, no matter how deeply you examine the evidence. So, what do you guys think really happened?